Two people in the news this week have died for the most painful and horrifying manner known to human beings. A 16-year-old Palestinian boy, Muhammad Hussein Abu Qadir, was captured and burned alive, evidently forced to swallow gasoline and being set on fire, presumably in retaliation for the abduction and murder of 3 Israeli youths last month. The other was a retired Methodist pastor, Charles Moore, lived in Texas, doused himself with gasoline in a grocery store parking lot, and set himself on fire. The young man who died in a murderous immolation is just the most recent in a 60-year-long violent conflict between Palestinian Muslims and Israeli Jews. The provocations behind this long and violent feud are real, and they're challenging, but there are workable solutions. And these two tribes of people have been staring at these workable solutions for generations without implementing them. They have been trapped in an environment of sick religion and hate speech and unending escalation of passionate emotions, because emotions can become their own logic so that it becomes necessary to capture a child and burn them alive. If you can deny the facts, if you can deny reality, if you can force your brain to fit into a religion that nurtures resentments and hostility and a desire for bloody revenge, then this becomes the deeds of God. Pastor Miller, on the other hand, took his own life. He said, "I'm not crazy. I'm not mentally ill." He described himself simply as being desperate, that he had spent his entire life fighting for social justice, trying to fight his own denomination to affirm same-sex marriage. And so he felt that he had to draw attention to the issues by literally setting himself on fire. On the face of it, these two deaths couldn't be more different. One was murder and the other was suicide. What's made me think of them together is not simply that they both died in fire, but because they both died because of the intransigence of the world's commitment to an unhealthy, literally inflammatory, prejudice and hatred, where talk radio has made hatred a form of entertainment, where being conservative or liberal justifies yelling and name-calling and dehumanizing of the people who disagree with you. One was a murder among 2 rival clans that just can't seem to let go of their need for revenge long enough to stop the violence. The other was a suicide, a final, extreme, and I must say a misguided effort to draw the nation's attention to the insane divisions that have haunted us for generations. And the fact that it was misguided is that most of you hadn't heard of it until just now, I'm sure. That something that at times there would be a Buddhist monk that would set themselves on fire during the Vietnam War, and it did attract national attention. But we have become such a crass, such a callous society that a desperate old minister setting himself on fire is not newsworthy in America, because he doesn't look good dancing on stage in skimpy clothing, and so our media doesn't have the time to talk about it. There's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous that says, "Don't tell me how sick you've been, tell me how well you want to be." When guys are trying to establish their chops in a AA group, they'll often tell stories, wild, fanciful, exaggerated stories about how much they used to drink. Meeting time can be wasted week after week as people try to top each other. If you let that stuff go on, glorifying, literally bragging about their drinking days until they convince themselves of what fun they're missing. And so to bring such storytelling to a compassionate end, someone sitting around the table will usually quote that proverb, "Don't tell me how sick you've been, tell me how well you want to be." AA works for people who really want the program to work because in a very simple, single-sentence distillation of both psychology and spirituality, it keeps inviting people to choose to be healthy, to choose health over illness, sanity over insanity, life over death. The program depends upon individual members of the group making the decision for themselves that they would rather be healthy than to be sick. This may seem like an odd claim, but a great deal of society encourages you to be unhealthy. A great deal of social pressure pushes you to be sick. They know that they have a disease that will kill them if they don't get healthy. There really is a huge distinction between alcoholics and moderate alcohol users. Those of us that will have a couple of drinks and go to bed and leave some beer in the refrigerator are a complete mystery to alcoholics. It's like, why are you going to bed now? There's still beer in the refrigerator. There is a sense when an alcoholic is in the presence of alcohol that the only natural stopping point is either passing out or running out of alcohol. They're never the ones that would get up from a table in the restaurant and walk away with half a glass of wine still on the table. That's what they call alcohol abuse, leaving it undrunk. But everyone who has spent any time in an AA meeting can name the names of several people they know who drank themselves to death. One summer, I did funerals for 4 different alcoholics from the same bar downtown. Harlow's is one of those bars that opens their doors at 7 o'clock in the morning for people that want to come in through the back door and sit down and start their drinking early in the day. It's something that, you know, the advertisements for alcohol will talk about drink responsibly, have a designated driver, but 3 out of every 4 drinks consumed in the United States is consumed by an alcoholic. The distillers know that without alcoholism, they would not have a profitable industry. Those of you that drink modestly or moderately, you are of no interest to them. You do not generate their profit. Only the addicts are really the ones that are consuming enough to make the industry profitable as it exists. I attended a lot of meetings when I was a hospital chaplain working. I was the chaplain on the drug and alcohol addiction treatment floor in the Veterans Hospital at Vanderbilt. An epiphany came to me one day when an elderly woman in a meeting who had been sober for 30 years, our patients in the VA hospital, we had one evening a week where former patients would come back and help us run meetings. And this woman said, "I'm glad that I am an alcoholic because my drinking forced me to find this path to life, to health." She went on to describe the insanity of a very sick marriage while she was drinking that led to very abusive and bad parenting of an alcoholic parent. But it was her drunk driving arrests and trips to the emergency room that forced her into a recovery program. The illness made her aware that she needed to be saved. Her salvation, her health, came to her because her illness was in sharp definition. For a lot of the rest of us, it doesn't mean that we're not sick. It just means that we don't have anything that keeps us from going to work tomorrow or keeps us from paying our bills. But alcoholism is one of those diseases that if you've got it, you're either going to get better or you're going to die prematurely. Any gathering of people, though, can become toxic because the relationships themselves can introduce unreality and illness into the exchange. That's why there are spouse abuse shelters and runaway centers. 2 people that stood in a church before an altar and swore that they were going to love each other and care for each other until the day that they die end up beating each other and pulling guns on each other. That's how sick, how toxic even a love relationship can become, and that's why these shelters exist. There was an entire department at MSU, I don't want to say which one because it was a sociology department, that was shut down, that lost its accreditation, was shut down because the professors had fallen into a level of melodrama that escalated into career and character assassination so that no student could survive the program. Huge and successful law firms here in Springfield have had to split up and have damaged reputations and practices of everyone involved because the environment within the law firm became toxic. Churches can be especially vulnerable to this because churches are voluntary organizations. There's more than 300 churches here in Springfield, so no one is forced to attend any one of them, but if you wanted to just spread your toxicity around, you could go to a different church every few weeks and not run out in the course of a single lifetime. Some people are only satisfied by melodrama on the level of human sacrifice. Doesn't matter what the real issues are. In counseling, we call this a conflict-habituated family system. There are people who only feel important, who feel excitement when they are creating drama. They use their emotions to control the behaviors of the people around them. Jesus confronts this in this passage from Matthew that we read today, but to what should I compare this generation? And not that I'm anyone to tell Jesus anything, but Jesus, it wasn't just your generation. It's like children sitting in marketplaces calling to one another, I was playing the flute, but you didn't dance. We pretended to be mourners wailing at a funeral, and you didn't cry with us. Literally, I got upset and you didn't do what I wanted you to do. Because in crazy town logic, if I'm upset, you have to change. My emotions control your behavior. In this insanity, I'm not responsible for my moods, my feelings, my emotions. You're responsible for the way I feel. You have to be something different, do something differently in order to satisfy my emotional needs. At one level, this is just emotional manipulation, but it can become emotional terrorism. Many people who find themselves in emotionally manipulative relationships at home, at work, at school, in politics, or in church will tell you that they feel like they're having to tiptoe on eggshells. Because if they do anything a little bit wrong, say the wrong thing, act the wrong way, do anything wrong, then the whole world turns into histrionics. Of course, in some churches, the clergy can tell you that they feel like they're tap dancing in a minefield. I've worked for that church. They're expected to be scholarly and yet deny virtually all the findings of scholarship. They're expected to be prophetic, but then never say anything that anyone could potentially disagree with, particularly people that contribute money. Hence, we have totally irrelevant churches being pastored by people who survive on antidepressants and Prilosec. I've been there too. But, you think if your church could close and nobody notices, then it probably ought to go ahead and close. And of the churches in town, even the ones that are huge, if you've lived here, I've lived here for 25 years now, if you can't think, what does that church do in the community that helps anybody, that has any impact? If you can't know, if it's not obvious, then, couldn't we use one more good flea market location? I mean, really, we don't have any really great Chinese restaurants here in town. I mean, turn those buildings into something that we need. Jesus, in this passage in Matthew, succinctly describes the insanity of trying to satisfy emotional terrorism. He says, John came, John didn't eat meat, he didn't drink wine, and you say, look, he's got a demon. The Son of Man comes, he eats meat, he drinks wine, and you say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. You can't satisfy an emotional terrorist. If you feel like you're living your life tap dancing on eggshells, you've already lost. The poetic conclusion to this pericope can be read as a plea to return to sanity. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens. What is more tiring and heavier than religious guilt or the fear of going to a place of eternal punishment, or the desire to satisfy the expectations of a religious community that needs you to deny who you are, to hide your love relationships, or a spouse around whom you have to pretend that their crazy worldview reflects reality in some way, that you've got to be measured by their histrionics rather than by reality. And so Jesus says, set that heavy burden aside. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. When we decided to start this church, we were having some meetings in the sanctuary of an old church at Drury University, and we there wrote a mission statement and a vision statement. Why are we going to start another church? There's already 300 and some churches in town. Why start another one? And the first sentence of our vision statement says that we wanted to create a healthy spiritual community. In part because none of us ever wanted to be part of an unhealthy spiritual community ever again. We'd all come from that church. And in part, what we wanted to do in forming a healthy spiritual community was to show other churches in town that it can be done, because they may not believe that it can be done. And in part, what we owe to the rest of the world is to show them that we can be reality-oriented day after day and not consume one another in emotional manipulation. You don't have to perpetuate hostilities. Israelis and Palestinians don't have to keep hating each other. Sunnis and Shia don't have to fight each other. Blacks and whites, Latinos and Anglos, liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, we don't have to keep setting each other on fire. We don't have to live in conflict for the rest of time. We can turn around and leave Crazy Town if only we all decide that we would rather be healthy than to be sick. And that if someone just needs to be sick to get attention or power, then we can choose not to play that game. Let's see if we cannot show the whole world how it can be done. Don't tell me how sick you've been. Tell me how well you want to be. Amen.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Reverend Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.